Before we get into the episode, please could you do me a favour and hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you're listening to the podcast. You'll be actively helping our community to grow and for us to reach more people, and it allows us to get great new guests on for future episodes.
Art versus the Algorithm with Will Preisner.
Welcome to Art vs. the Algorithm. I'm your host, Will Preisner, and in this episode, I'm thrilled to be joined by Sam Barton, a photographer whose beautiful work I've admired for some time. We explore his fascinating journey from growing up immersed in photography to working with some of the industry's most renowned photographers and models. Sam shares how he captures the essence of his subjects and creates emotionally resonant images that go beyond technical perfection. Check out the show notes to visit Sam's website and view his beautiful work. To celebrate the launch of episode 6, I'm giving you the chance to win an incredible camera. I shot a short film with Pink Unicorn, a talented art model from Lisbon, whose performance blew me away. The film has been released as a reel on the show's Instagram page, and it explains how to enter the competition there for free. Head over to @ArtVSAlgorithm, there's a link in the show notes, and find the reel titled Win This Camera. Don't miss your chance to win. Make sure you enter before midnight on the 17th of March 2025, and good luck. So, without further ado, let's get on to episode 6 with Sam Barton. I want to take you right back to the beginning of your journey as a photographer. On your website, you describe yourself as saying photography is in your DNA. How is this the case?
I guess it goes, right back to the very beginning, as you say. My parents were both in the industry. My mum was a model. My dad worked with quite a famous British photographer, a chap called Terence Donovan. My dad was his producer at that time. Terry was doing commercials. So this meant that your view on what work should be like is what your parents are up to. My view was very focused around photography. My mum would go to studios for work. My dad would go to studios for work, but obviously for different reasons, different purposes. But also, it wasn't just their profession. All around our house, we had photos. We had Helmut Newton pictures on the wall. We had Herb Ritts pictures on the wall. It was a background into photography, and I kind of assumed that was normal. I kind of assumed that's what you did as a child. You kind of followed your parents into their industry, and so in my case, I ended up working with a lot of Terry's assistants when I was sort of 15 and 16 in my school holidays, just having fun. Really, it was enjoyable learning it, and so whilst at school, it became really apparent that that was something I wanted to do as a profession. So I actually left school when not many people do this. After my GCSEs, I got into a taxi, and after my history exam, I got into a taxi, went for an interview and got that, and didn't stop working in commercial advertising photography for about a couple of years. So the DNA piece is founded by my parents, a big believer in the whole sort of nature and nurture concept, and it sort of proved its worth because it took me through into quite a fun and successful photography career in my early 20s.
Can you pinpoint any particular moment, perhaps in your youth or a little older, like any particular moment that was the catalyst for you to want to follow that journey? Was there any specific catalyst?
There was, actually. I knew I wanted to take pictures, and I'd had a lot of experience with some really cool people, but I didn't really think immediately I'm going to leave school and go straight into photography. The catalyst for me was a chap called Vaughan Emerson, who was my English teacher at school. He was also into photography, and he'd seen me taking pictures whilst at school. And I just really liked his take. He was like, why don't you just try it out? Just go and give it a go. You can always come back and do your A-levels. And the problem was I tried it out and loved it. And I was actually immersed in a career, the equivalent of a university degree. So I didn't go back and finish my A-levels or even go to do a BA. I did, after that, do a postgraduate at the London College of Printing. So I've had a very strange education, GCSEs, and then straight to postgraduate. In between was a whole bunch of commercial and fashion advertising photography, kind of crazy.
It sounds like the best route because I suppose you weren't lumbered with the BA debt in the middle of it.
Well, yeah. I mean, Will, I'm a tiny bit older than you, so you will hate to hear this, but my postgraduate cost, I think, £360.
Yeah, I'll try and hide the dismay that I feel hearing that. But I'm happy for you though that was the case.
Yeah, well, I mean, the world has changed a lot since then.
Yeah, I read a quote on your website reflecting on the start of your career while you were learning the ropes with top photographers such as Mario Testino, you said that it was a great period in your life when all that mattered was the art of taking or participating in a unique moment that could be captured by a photograph or a print, or ideally both. I just want to focus on that small phrase, a unique moment. What is it about capturing and being part of those unique moments through photography that you feel so fondly about? Why does it matter to you?
That's quite an astute observation. I think there's so much to photography. If you start at the very beginning, the first thing you're learning is all the sort of technical aspects of photography, how a camera works, the difference between ISO, shutter speed, aperture, etc. You get sort of immersed in that sort of technical triangle, film speeds, and all kinds of things that really kind of take you down a particular path, and they shape actually how you end up taking pictures. After that, for me, I spent a lot of time in studios doing advertising, and this is a period of time where you shot with film, 5x4 film, 10x8 film, and you had to get it right in camera. So it was incredibly expensive. You put a Polaroid in, a pack of 10 was £100, which is a lot of money back in the 90s. So you just had to learn to be very, very good at lighting. So you became very proficient technically at setting up the studio, the right type of lights, lots of gobos and ways to add or reduce reflections, etc. So after many years or several years of that sort of level of technical photography, plus everything had to be printed. Everything, in order to see the image, you had to go to a darkroom, be it E6 or black and white. We had to kind of turn that into a negative. That became a contact sheet, and that became print. So it was very methodical. It wasn't a quick process. There's no sort of tethering to your laptop and seeing the image immediately and figuring out which one you like. You had to wait several hours between taking the image and seeing what it looked like. And having done all of that and having become pretty good at the sort of technical side of photography, it became really apparent that, when I was working with I was very fortunate. I worked with some really wonderful people who were in themselves very, very capable photographers. What was really my observation was it wasn't all of that technical capability that made the image. It was how they took the image, when they took the image, and perhaps most importantly, the bond that they had created between themselves and the subject. And 9 times out of 10, you're photographing somebody who is famous. They are a singer, they are an actor, they might even be royalty, and there's a certain amount of presence that this person will have, and you might have to switch gears to connect with that person and work out how to get the best out of them. And that ability is not there for everybody. You might be amazing at lighting, you might be wonderful at composition and focus and aperture and all that. But ultimately, if you can't take the image, then all of that technical capability goes out the window. You mentioned Mario. I was at the shoot when we were working with Princess Diana. I was assisting him, so I was loading 120 into the Pentaxes he was using, and he's somebody who has 3 or 4 on a go, and one's got color, one's got black and white, and they've got different lenses on, and he's shooting quickly, but also methodically. There are 10 frames in each camera, so when I say quickly, it's the same speed that I can load a film that he's shooting at, practically. But if you go back and look at those pictures, and by the way, I'm referring to some that were for Vanity Fair, taken in, I think, 1997. I didn't really appreciate it at the time, but those images are actually out of focus. From a technical perspective, there's something you might want to go today into some AI sharpening tool and correct the fact that he's misfocused. But of course, it's not about that. We were shooting in a daylight studio, and it was moments he was capturing. He was capturing the presence of somebody and the genuine connection that two of them had. That mean they had a connection because they'd shot many times before. But he was also able to really draw out the personality in these images. And so you see past these technical imperfections. You see this wonderful, wonderful woman. And it's because this is an example of one of many photographers who's got that ability to really capture the essence of somebody's personality.
Why does that matter to you? Because you're also a photographer and you've moved on from being an assistant. Like, why does capturing that moment and that essence, why does that matter to you personally?
My reason for realizing that the technical side of photography is important, but actually capturing somebody's personality was way more important, was through working with these wonderful people and seeing past that need to get everything spot on. And so, slightly tangential aspect to this, but I might as well share it with you. I'm somebody who had a pretty complicated history with health. I was epileptic for a long time when I was younger. I had a choice, basically. I would just sort of disappear and be somebody who lived in their bedroom to protect themselves from potentially having accidents, or I could do what my personality wanted, which is to go and live life. I did suffer the consequences for that. You can probably see a little scar on my lip here. I'm all sorted now, but the output of that is you realize an appreciation for life. When you've gone through something and you've had some life or death experiences. I actually drowned a couple of times, but coming out of that, it's given me a massive appreciation for life and the people I surround myself with. And it's those sorts of groundings in one's personality that you then use. You don't realize, but you use things like that. There are life events that you'll have, Will, that have been so significant for you that they foster part of your personality. And that was a big one for me. And so when it came to, back to answering your question, when it came to sort of what type of photography I wanted to do and what things I was interested in, it was back to that DNA point. I was always fascinated by fashion. I was always fascinated by people, and that ability to evoke the right reaction in somebody when they're looking at an image and they see a beautiful person wearing an amazing outfit and the scene is fabulous, but actually what you're looking at isn't the scene. It isn't the lighting. It might be the outfit, but the first thing you're looking at is a very narrow window, which is above the nose, before the eyebrows. It's just the eyes. So you start with that as a concept. What's the expression in the face? And you start working back until the frame is full. And that for me took me a while to realize it, but that's to me is how I approach photography. I'm always trying to get an image where you look at somebody's eyes and you have this immediate connection with that person, even though you don't know who they are, you've never met them before, but you feel that essence is something you can understand and you can appreciate. And so everything else makes sense. If you don't have that, the opposite happens. If you don't have that connection, you might miss the fact that there's amazing lighting, or it's in a stunning scene in Paris somewhere, or she's wearing a beautiful Yves Saint Laurent dress. That's irrelevant because you've missed capturing that person, stopping that person from looking at the image because they haven't seen the expression in the person's face. That's what I've always pursued, to the extent of almost giving up on trying to have the best lighting and trying to have the best kit. I'm always after trying to capture that moment.
It's really interesting to hear because I'm perhaps not as far along in my journey as you are, but it's a realization that I've also personally come to with regards to the technical side of, as I'm a cinematographer by trade, that's my job. And it translates into photography somewhat, the mentality towards kit and how you prioritize that in terms of the value it brings to a shoot and whether I should put all of my energy into focusing on that and exposure and lighting beyond the subject that we're shooting and the content that we're shooting and trying to elevate that as much as possible. And that my focus should be on, in photography, on the model, in film, on the talent. And I'm sort of I was going to say subservient to that, but I'm trying to elevate them and they are my priority and everything else comes second to it. And if that's what I need to put all of my attention on, then that's what I will lead with. And the other things can be sidelined and be more instinctive as opposed to taking a priority.
Well, yeah, but you've also got a really interesting perspective. You know, the viewfinder for you is a different viewfinder for me. My dad works as a film producer. He's made a number of movies. And I've been exposed to his world of cinematography. And you meet some amazing art directors and director of photography. And that perspective, the way in which that person sees an image, that sort of obviously landscape or panoramic view, is actually another very incredible art. It's an incredible art form in itself. And I'm often drawn to those sorts of very cinematic perspectives because they're a great example of trying to capture the essence of a moment, because you've got an audience you need to capture and motivate for an hour and a half, or whatever the length of the movie is. And those scenes are designed to create that emotion. You're supposed to follow the subject through, a scene, and it really makes a difference when you've got that much bigger frame to fill. So I don't know. I think you've actually got a very envious, from my perspective, I'm very envious of that journey you're on, because, as I say, it's a whole other perspective, and it gives you an opportune moment to really take the viewer down a very different path. I actually really enjoyed, I watched this morning your video of Kate Moss and friends. That was a beautiful white and white scene sort of very much reminded me of a number of people I'd worked with in the past. But anyway, it's perspective and, what you create inside that window. And like I said, I'm very envious of that being your day job.
The thing is, that's where we possibly have some crossover on that Kate Moss job that you just referred to, because Mario Testino was a photographer on that.
Then it explains a lot. Those two have a ton of history.
How would you describe your style of photography today?
There are other photographers, and you can look at their work and immediately see that it's a so-and-so photo, because there's a quality of lighting, there is a quality of editing, there is a quality of styling in terms of how it's shot. And I'm excited about photographing things that are quite random and quite different. And I'm not drawn to one specific genre. I'm not fixated on headshots or landscapes or whatever. And I was chatting to this model just a few months back and also explaining, I'm not really sure what my particular style is, but I'm enthusiastic about photography in general, and I have a couple of things and I have some things that I'm trying to achieve and do. And she said, no, come on, everyone knows this. You do portraits, you do fashion, and then you do amazing art nude landscapes. And she summed it up in that very narrow and very specific bundle. And I think she was absolutely right, because that's what you don't realize this, but there's a certain amount of muscle memory in how you take pictures. Park all of the technical stuff we've spoken about. After a fashion, when you're photographing somebody and you want to get the best out of them, there are different ways in which everyone will approach it, but I default into those three genres. I do have some projects I'm trying to do. They will deviate from the norm, but if I'm in a studio with a model and there's various lighting options and outfits we're looking at, then it will probably just fall into the sort of fashion editorial / portraiture bucket. And a big part of that, again, trying to capture that person's personality.
Can you take me through your process from kind of the development of an idea and pre-production and planning to the shoot day and then into kind of post-production and beyond?
Yeah, of course. So there are effectively two answers to this, albeit very similar answers, but for different outcomes. So there's a studio. I want to take some stuff for my own portfolio and for the sheer joy of taking pictures. There's that process. And then there's another where I'm working on this project, which involves traveling, and that involves landscapes, it involves research on the locations. But they ultimately start with the same premise. I put together a mood board. I usually do that in PowerPoint and Google Slides in my case. And I put together sort of the look and feel that I'm trying to create, often including images to provide the model with a reference. So in the studio, the reference would be type of outfits, or perhaps most importantly, moods and looks. I may have already researched and booked a particular studio, be that a daylight one or a strobe-led studio. So the sort of moods and the kind of aesthetic to focus on will be in that. And then I also spend quite a bit of time looking at the model's own work and providing references that I think are relevant to the kind of look that I'm trying to achieve. So the mood board is kind of what I'm looking for, the kind of outfits to bring to the shoot, an example of the type of studio we're going to be working in, but then a mixture of images from their portfolio or my portfolio to showcase, how to get there. And I guess what I'm trying to do is to arrive there without having to, shake hands. And by the way, hi, my name's Sam, and it's nice to meet you. I'm trying to get a couple of steps into that process and say, here's a kind of bunch of things. And I will also send a few DMs, recorded messages of just thoughts I've got that you can't really contextualize, that narrative you can't really contextualize in a couple of slides. With the landscape stuff, it's very much the same sort of thing, but it's got a lot more locations and timings of when to get there before sunrise or in the evening where the light's good. I'll also do some crazy things like figure out where to stay, because you might want to be as close as possible to a 5 a.m. start. So, you're not in the car for an hour before actually taking some pictures. So quite a lot of planning, my own sort of recceing that I do to make sure that the shoot day is a good one and sort of well planned. So that's pre-prep. I'm never going to fixate on trying to capture every single image that I've put together in the mood board. It's true to the very definition of mood board. It's setting a scene. But I might have come with a few things, backdrops, or even I went to a shoot recently and I had a Venetian mask I wanted to use. So I might come with a few things, and that will help sort of set the scene and define when and where to use those different items. But the mood board is really just there to help start the conversation and start the way we're shooting. And more recently, I've really enjoyed shooting in daylight studios because they force you to think out of the box. So in many ways, the mood board goes out the window because you've just seen this beautiful light just coming through the windows, and all you want to do is capture the person in that light. And that was not on the mood board, but it's way better than I could have dreamt of. And those sorts of moments, you die for them, but they cascade into many other things. So in that moment, you both sort of work through a couple of things. And I'm quite collaborative with how I shoot. I'm very collaborative with how I shoot. I always shoot tethered, so the model's seeing the images that I'm creating. And that can often in itself spark the next set of images we take, which you might go, oh, I've got this outfit, I really want to shoot in it, or I really love that light. And it could be that she even wants to be nude in that light because the light is a great way of defining that shape. And it's again, very collaborative, wanting to kind of get the best out of somebody and for them to be enthused about the images, even if that means that all of that work I did putting into the PowerPoint deck, has gone out the window, and I could have forgotten that because we're just sort of working through some ideas together. A long time ago, I would have had stylists and makeup artists and all of the army that goes into creating that perfect image. And that's a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, but it's a big setup. And I'm quite happy, just me and a model, and working through some ideas together and creating what I think images that are worthy of capturing.
How do you know if those moments of inspiration that come during the shoot, how do you know whether they're of enough value to bother pursuing instead of just sticking to the original ideas that you had?
Well, I think my job as a photographer is to make the moments and to learn enough about the person that I'm photographing that they feel they can trust me, they feel that we have a connection of some sort, that they feel there's value in the images we're taking. It's not just me clicking away and they'll never see the images. It's, I'm saying, did you like this one? What about that one? And we work through them together. So it's my reason for doing the shoot in the first place. It's to try and, I don't want to use the word unlock, but it's trying for me to figure out who that person is and get the best out of them. 9 times out of 10, they're a professional model. You could argue whatever they do, it's going to look amazing. But I want to get past that and try and get something that other people haven't captured of that person. Otherwise, you're just getting a carbon copy of something that's already on their Instagram feed or their portfolio. You're right. I could have just doggedly stuck to the mood board, but in many ways, breaking that mold is actually what I enjoy doing. And I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, I learned that through working with some really great people who, again, would approach this with a collection of ideas. The art director would be there having drawn up the idea from the image, but actually the output is often slightly different because the personality in the person you're working with is what you really wanted to capture. Because if you're talking about buying an image or buying a product, an outfit that the person's wearing, you're actually more enthused by the expression on the person's face than the outfit itself. You just want to create that look and feel by buying the outfit. And I guess that's, that training in my past is what ultimately shapes how I take pictures today.
To try and summarize as well what you were saying there, for you, adaptation is key to the enjoyment of the shoot as well as the success of it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What is it about the human form that strikes you and drives you to want to capture it? I
can't take an image of an amazing landscape on its own. I always need to add a person into the image to complete the image in my head. And I was having this conversation with a really nice woman recently who's a gallery curator. And she's like, well, surely you don't need a person in each image. Sometimes you can just capture the beautiful landscape for itself. That is true, you can. But I've always been drawn to an image of a landscape that has a human connection to it. So one that you're drawn to because you can really understand the context better, the shape and size of the landscape. So for me, that happened when I started photographing with art models. I love working with fashion models, high sort of long legs and amazing shapes and wonderful expressions and can jump and all kinds of wonderful things that come with a high fashion model. But it wasn't until a couple of years ago I started working with art models who really changed my own perspective on working on shooting in landscapes, because they have a much more inherent connection to the world around them, and they think very differently. Yes, they're beautiful. Yes, they work hard to keep their body in shape. And yes, they're very dynamic in shapes and things. And in many ways would make a great fashion model. But the reason they are art models, the reason why they are fantastic at what they do, is invariably because they have that, like I said, inherent connection. And so when they are in the landscape, in the what might be a beautiful surroundings, they look much more connected in that moment than somebody else might do in the same setting. And so just to contextualize some of this, a couple of years back, I was in Malta with a lovely model called Kate Snick. She's known as Art Deco model on Instagram. And we'd gone to Malta just to do some, I had a mood board. I'd taken this very detailed mood board of some sort of street fashion that I wanted to do. And, we'd had a great time in Valletta in Malta, the capital of Malta, doing exactly that, doing some really cool street fashion. Very sort of black and white and dare I say it, sort of Herb Ritzy in approach. But I'd already planned to go to the sister island, and we went there and went on a bit of a touristy sightseeing visit. We knew we were going to take some pictures, and I had some ideas. But it wasn't until I saw the salt pans, which are on the list, that we both sort of suddenly stopped and took a breath, because it was such an extraordinary location, and one that you really had to appreciate with somebody in the image. And we did do this. She had this beautiful long pink dress on, and so she's lying down inside one of these salt pans. And just to describe them, because you kind of have to see them to witness, but what they're very old rock formations that have been created by the Phoenicians. This is a civilization before the Romans, long time ago. And the idea is they capture seawater, the sun evaporates the seawater, leaving behind the salt, and then you can harvest the salt, and it's at the time very valuable. So you've got these wonderful, very moon-like craters in this limestone rock, and Kate's lying in the center in her dress, and it's a wonderful way of showing the whole scene. But then, we both looked at these images, and Kate said it first. She said, "We've got to come back and we've got to do this properly." So we stayed an extra night in Gozo, and got up at 5 o'clock or just before to get there for sunrise, and did some quite beautiful art nude images where she's a very human form in this incredible landscape that, yes, you could have taken that image of the landscape. You could really brought it to life, but with a person in the middle of it. Yes, and then she's naked, but you're not really seeing details of nudity. You're really just seeing the perfect shape, the very sort of ivory, elegant skin, and you're not staring at parts of a human. You're staring at the shape of a human, and that, for me, was really important. I should also finalize by saying it was an incredible scene seen across the landscape, as everyone would do, because you're standing on something and you're seeing vertically across it. But I wanted to really display the entire scene. So I switched from a regular camera to using a drone and photographed down. So what you saw was this wonderful sort of checkerboard effect of these shapes and this person in the center. And my job was to find good compositions and really bring to life both the landscape, but beauty of the human form connecting with it.
Why do you choose to shoot with the female form and shoot with female models in these contexts? What does it give to your work?
No, I mean, I don't think it's particularly conscious thing one way or the other. I would love to shoot guys in the same scenario. First and foremost, there is a greater quantity of art models who are women. So when it comes to, and bear in mind, when you go to sort of locations that I'm referring to, there's a big logistical piece that goes with it. Is availability, travel, planes, car rental, a bunch of other things. Oh, and I'm really complicated. My epileptic start to my career meant that I missed out on learning to drive when everyone else kind of got their driving license. You probably did that, when before you're 20. Well, I missed out on that. So I've got a great bike license. That's brilliant. But I haven't got a car license. So I'm invariably looking for a model who's available, who can get to a location and has a car. And you put all those together, and I'm left with a short list anyway. I was very keen to sort of not get put into a box, if you like, of you only photograph women. And I was quite fortunate to go away with another model who I really get on with. We have a really good connection. Her name is Elena. Her model name is Nausicaa Yami. I had some time this year. I was keen to kind of go away to extend my project I'm working on, this landscape stuff, and really had fixated on volcanoes, black sand, and some really interesting shapes that come out of the lava of volcanoes. And we agreed to go to Lanzarote together. But she was keen to bring her boyfriend along, so it would be literally the three of us. And during the sort of build up to going away, I said to her, okay, I've got a crazy idea, and feel free to shoot me down, but how would you feel about having the two of you photographed as we do some of these images together, as we do some of these sort of landscape shots? So I've got the sort of juxtaposition of male and female in these same sort of settings. And the very first response back was, yes, he'd love to do it. In fact, he's just done some art news stuff with me with another photographer in, I think it was Holland. And so I was like, this is actually going to happen. Like I said, the logistical problem was solved. We were all going to be there together, and it was just a case of finding a good moment. And we did actually on the first day. We went to these beautiful vineyards on Lanzarote where they're black volcanic sand, and then these circular rock formations to protect the vines, I should say, because it's incredibly windy out there. And so you've got this quite weird formation of circles in black sand, and somebody sitting in or lying in a sort of nubile position inside, or two people in this case, inside these shapes, really kind of brought to life the context of where we were. And again, once again, it wasn't really focusing on parts of a person, it was focusing on shapes. And with the two of them together, and it was really nice watching them connect like this, and then having to sort of help shape poses. Her boyfriend Mark, like, totally up for this, but not, if you like, an expert. He's certainly not an art model in the way that we've been discussing previously. But they worked brilliantly together, and we took some great images together. I've had fun printing them here with my printer on the right.
Amazing. And what would you say is the difference between shooting like parts of a person as opposed to the overall shape of a person? Like, you've mentioned that a couple of times. What would you say the difference is?
The way in which I've been describing this has often been an image where it's by design supposed to be printed big to go on a wall. And as a viewer, you're looking at the entirety of the scene and appreciating all aspects of it. The landscape, the quality of the edit, the way it's printed. And of course, there's somebody in there in a beautiful pose, a beautiful shape, and they're bringing to life the images. It's ultimately what your eye is drawn to, some leading lines, etc. So if I've achieved that, that's my goal. And I don't want you to be, as a viewer, to try and narrow in, to try and pinch and zoom on a print to see something that isn't what the eye, or isn't what I'm trying to evoke in the image. I want you to look at the emotional connection the person has with the landscape. I don't want you to be drawn by something provocative. You take the same, to answer your question, if you go into a studio or even actually in a landscape but using traditional photography with a regular camera, then of course you're going to get closer to the subject and you are going to start seeing aspects of the breasts, etc. And it's very important to not go into this and to pursue taking an image for the simple aspect of showing somebody's physical shape. It's, again, going back to trying to capture the emotion in somebody's character and bring out their personality. For me, the images that I'm drawn to aren't where the body shapes are in any way explicit. It's because you're almost breaking down any barriers with the nudity. And so the image you're taking really brings to life their personality. And they happen to be naked, but you're hopefully looking at that section of their face that I was referring to previously, where you're really focused on their eyes. Or maybe even they have their eyes closed and shapes that they're producing, the expression is in their body form. But again, it's that you're looking at. You're not looking at their body parts, you're looking at them as a personality, their character. So the nudity in images that I've always been drawn to isn't in any way explicit, or I hope isn't explicit. It's because you're looking at the character and the personality. Again, it goes back to the photographers I was really drawn to, who there were nudity in the images, but they weren't what you saw first. It was the character that you saw first, and that's what you as a viewer were asked to see when you were looking at them. Now, it's quite sort of controversial, but I was always drawn to Herb Ritts, Helmut Newton, Patrick de Marchelier, those sorts of people, actually Mario as well. And those sorts of images there are always tons of nudity in them. But like somebody like Mario Testino, he's actually not interested. This book next to me is full of pictures of Kate Moss, and she's often very naked. But he's genuinely not interested in her body. That's not who he is. But the images they've taken together, again, are about character. They're about a connection. They're about the model and the photographer knowing each other, and those images being captured. And yes, sometimes she's naked, but it's kind of irrelevant because the image, the viewer is looking at that character. That the photographer and the person have that special bond that they've managed to capture those images together.
The art nude images that stop me in my tracks are the ones where I feel like an instant emotional connection to them. There's a overwhelming sense of emotion in the images that I am relating to, whatever that may be, whatever that theme may be. And I think there's some of your photos specifically, why I reached out to you in the first place, as well as during my research, where they did really strike me. And some of them were nude photographs. And like you say, it wasn't about the nudity, why they struck me. It was about the energy. Sometimes it's hard. I find it hard to articulate exactly what it is, but it's the energy and the emotion that I feel whilst looking at that image that hits me the hardest, and why I feel those images have value. And personally, why I like to pursue creating photography like that. When you're on a shoot, how do you go about fostering those strong connections with a model so that you can elevate your work to that position?
First and foremost, I try and be very open as a person, and very, I'm always very conscious that 9 times out of 10, the model's going to be very professional and can just switch it on and take some pictures. And if you wanted to, and you didn't want to say anything at all, you could just sit there with a camera and you could take some pictures, and they'd be half decent because the model is actually taking the pictures for you. Effectively, you're just pressing a button. I don't want those pictures. I'm genuinely a people person. I really like people. And I realized that the connection that I'm trying to create with my model or the subject that I'm photographing, and breaking down any barriers and forming some sort of trust and getting the best out of them, I realized that actually I do that in my day job as well. I work in software engineering today. I very much believe that you want to let people be their best and let them bring their character to work, and I want to empower them to really be their best. And ultimately, these people are better than me. And I don't want to create a situation where I'm hampering them or preventing them from being amazing. And I want to create a platform for them to really grow. And I want to foster that so that I can find a way to bring out the character that I think is in there and help them grow as a person. So focusing on models, when you're shooting with somebody who's professional, they know how an image should be taken. I'm always looking for that extra little bit of character. And you can't get that unless you've got some form of trust. I'm going to have to share about myself. And ultimately, that's how humans work. You want to share a part of your personality, and then somebody else will say, well, I've got a story a bit like that too. And you're having a conversation that is genuine. It's real. If you can imagine that translating into how you take an image, it's much easier to take that photograph and capture the essence of somebody if you've had that conversation before, because they know and trust you and you have some connection in various ways. I would much rather work with a model for half a day or longer, but spend the first hour just having a coffee and having a conversation, learning a bit about them and letting them know who I am and making sure they understand that I'm somebody they can trust. So that when it does come to those slightly more evocative images where you're trying to capture somebody's personality, they're actually going to share that personality with you. They're not going to just give you one of their out-of-the-box poses. It's you're ultimately moving past that and you're photographing them as they want to be seen.
Are you to some extent encouraging a performance in them, like to feel comfortable enough to complement the mood you're trying to create in an image?
I wouldn't like to use the word performance because that obviously suggests that it's a charade of some sort. I do like the concept of performance, but again, I wouldn't like to use that word because actually I'd rather not have an actor give me their character. I'd rather see the personality, their true personality, because a really good actor can create that same sentiment that I'm probably trying to pursue. They can probably turn it on quite quickly. And I have witnessed that, and it's a really precious thing. I mean, there's a model called Marissa, and I've shot with a few times in New York. She's a model, yes, but actually she's an actress. And when you photograph her, her characters, the personalities that she's putting together are wonderful. They genuinely make me laugh because I'm so excited taking these images because they have all of that character you're referring to. And so she'll put on outfit one, and then there's this incredible expression, incredible personality that comes with that. And then she puts on outfit number two, and it's a whole other personality and character. And I'm always flabbergasted by that. For that reason, we'll always try and meet up with her if I'm in New York to try and shoot with her because she's phenomenal. However, the bit that we were just talking about is if I'm working with somebody and I'm trying to, and they're not an actor or not an actress, and 10 times out of 10, that's the case really. I'm looking for that extra bit. So yes, a model or art model, whatever, they can do all that thing and they'll be phenomenal at what they do. But I'll always try and add a little bit more of trying to capture that personality. And I think that's best done by learning who they are and sharing a genuine connection with them if you can. And I see that as my job as a photographer, and I see that as a challenge, and I enjoy the process of learning somebody's character and ultimately working out when to take the picture and how to draw out that extra bit of character.
So as opposed to seeing it as encouraging a performance, are you trying to encourage them to be more like free to be themselves, more vulnerable, more open?
Exactly, 100%. Because if you manage to create that situation where they can feel that they can be free to be themselves, that is the happiest part of a shoot for me. Even lighting and all that out the window, just seeing that, realizing that that's happened, and then having the opportunity, you happen to have a camera with you at the same time. That for me is a special moment in any shoot.
We're looking for figurative artists, photographers, models, and activists. If you'd like to be a guest on Art versus the Algorithm, reach out to us on our social channels at Art vs Algorithm, and let's chat.
So I'm wondering how you would advise photographers starting out who want to shoot nudes in a way that we've been discussing, how to approach both the topic as well as the models that they work with. Do you think that advice needs to be tailored and is different as to whether it's a man who wants to do that or a woman who wants to do that you would be advising?
The first word I would use is respect. You have to respect the person you're shooting with. Respect them for their personality, respect them for their body shapes, but most importantly, respect them for their boundaries. They're likely to be comfortable in their own skin, but they're a human, and if you're conversationally saying something that's inappropriate, they're going to feel that and immediately lose that trust or, desire to stand there and pose for you. I mean, they might even walk out if you say something inappropriate. And the same is true of proximity. If you're going to get anywhere near somebody, you're going to start to walk into like an invisible space that isn't yours anymore. It's somebody else's space. So picture an invisible box around that person and don't try and enter into that space when you're photographing them, or even taken the image, maybe show them back of the camera, but allow them to take the camera and let them go through it rather than be close enough that they feel like you're entering into their space. So those are sort of, if you like, rules of engagement. And then I'm sure there's a Wikipedia page for stuff like this. You don't want to immediately set a situation where this person doesn't trust you, because you're going to get terrible images, and that will come across in the photograph. You won't see eyes, or you won't see an expression that, again, I've been doggedly talking about, where the viewer is drawn to the expression. You'll see somebody looking really pissed off, and you're never going to want to edit those pictures because they don't mean anything to you. So that's, I think, job one when it comes to working with somebody in an art nude sense. The other bit of advice I think is really important is don't take a nude image for the sake of taking a nude image. Have a reason for nudity. That's going to sound really obvious when you hear it out loud, but you can take the same image of a person wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and if you've captured them properly, then the jeans and the t-shirt image and the nude image, they should have the same impact, the same power. The only reason to add nudity is if it evokes an extra bit of personality and character and an expression that you couldn't achieve otherwise. Now, a lot of that comes down to that piece around trust that we spoke about. If you're able to capture somebody and you're able to show a connection between photographer and model, and it seems genuine, then nudity in that same image is actually quite empowering, because it suggests that connection is even that much stronger. So, like I said, have great respect for that person, and that unlocks many things if you demonstrate you have that respect. And then the other being, have a reason for it being nude in the first place, and it can give you great rewards if you do it well and haven't messed up the first bit.
Okay, I think that's brilliant advice. And I don't know whether you covered do you feel there would be any difference to advice you would give to the approach that like male or female photographers should take, or would it all be the same?
So there's a few bits to that. So obviously a male photographer taking nude pictures of a female model wanders into the male gaze conversation, which is probably a whole other podcast in itself.
It's books upon books.
It's books, exactly. I mean, Michelangelo didn't have this problem, but it's very, very real today. And I think that comes down to some of the things we discussed. But the two pieces that I've just explained, I think, are very male orientated. They work for female, but they're very sort of, chaps, this is not an invite to a date. This is an image you're going to take, right? So that's the male advice. The female advice broadly is the same, except that the respect piece is partially sort of considered. A woman will feel more comfortable with a woman, if you like, in a default sense, albeit it's not just which sex you are, it's also sexual orientation. So you might, as a female model, feel uncomfortable with a female photographer if actually she's actually excited by you as a model, and impacting the respect piece. So the two pieces I'm suggesting as my advice, and by the way, because this is a free-form conversation, and there's probably other bits of advice, but those are the two bits that come to mind immediately. I think they apply equally to both, but I do speak to models and ask about this. It really just depends on their own character, their own personality. Some have been doing this for a long time, and they really just don't feel too concerned in either way, in either situation. Whereas some models are a bit more, maybe newer to this, or inherently a bit more shy. And so, a female photographer might give them a bit more trust and help them be their best in their moment. And so if that's the case, and I'm coming at it, and I'm obviously a bloke, then it's my job to make them feel the same level of trust. Otherwise, I'm going to get bad images, as we spoke about.
What is it about art nude photography, the nudity in that differs from the nudity in, say, pornography? Is there any difference?
Well, absolutely, right? You could argue that the frame and maybe even composition are the same. But the big difference, obviously, is the emotion you're trying to create, right? Let's be frank. If you, as a photographer, what you're trying to achieve is something that is pornographic, it's a very different space to a photographer who's trying to create something that is artistic. So for me, very much want to be in the artistic camp. And to that end, I will absolutely ensure that the images I'm taking are not in the pornographic sense. And I will go further. I will say to the model after we've shot together, let's review the images together. And if there's anything she feels is or in any way uncomfortable, not even pornographic, but she feels isn't a good representation of her, then we'll happily delete the image before it's even gone through any form of editing or anything. Because there's no point me keeping that image. I don't want to keep an image to use separately. The time it takes to edit an image, and then the cost of me printing it is expensive, and time is expensive. So I only want to invest the time in editing an image that I like, but also the model appreciates as well. That's my starting position. So absolutely, I would never want to cross what are the red lines that a model has, whatever they are. And that could be quite as simple as they might only want to do implied. The shapes that they're creating, the poses they're creating, by design, are covering her up. And if that's the sort of images that we're going to create together, then perfect. That's what we'll do. So I think that going back to the reason for taking nude images in the first place, is there has to be a reason for it. Pornographic, there is a reason for it. And it's a very different reason. If you're doing the sort of creative images, then it has to have a very, very different reason. And sometimes that reason doesn't justify the image being nude. you can take the same image and create the same character or personality with the person wearing, being fully clothed.
You've been shooting photography for a while now, and you've seen the transition into online platforms like Instagram. How have you felt that this transition has impacted your photography?
Well, you can't get away from Instagram. I think we're all aware of that. And I actually really enjoy the social aspect of social media platforms. I'm an advocate in many ways. I believe there are good things. As I said before, I'm very grateful for the connections I've made through Instagram. And the nice thing about it is you follow somebody because you like their work, and they follow people who they like, and ultimately you might like their kind of photography or people that they work with. And so that network effect of following and liking and commenting on images is actually something I fully embrace, because I wouldn't have met so many people without it. And so I'm incredibly grateful for those connections, even ones that are across the other side of the world and I'm likely never to meet. But I know that there are people who are they're very like-minded, and they're people who I would ultimately enjoy having a coffee with, because they're the kind of people who clearly share an approach to photography. So yes, I love and embrace Instagram for those reasons. It's obviously frustrating when you've taken an image and there is nudity in it, and in my case, it's never going to be something that is explicit or offensive, I think. Obviously, people can be offended by things that, it's obviously very subjective. So, when I say it's not offensive, it could be offensive to somebody who's very sort of strongly religious views and doesn't like nudity. But that's the whole point around social media. It's a platform for everybody, and it should be a safe space for anybody, young or old, and whatever their views are. So my intention is to take an image that shouldn't cause offense. But then I suppose the thing that I'm appealed to is a group of people who wouldn't be offended by that type of image. So my preference, when I actually wrote this to the product owner at Instagram, would be to create a walled garden where you have a safe space to share those images, but with a group of like-minded people, with the right sort of filtering on the way in for people who choose to access content that may have those restrictions, just in the same way that you go to a movie and it stops you, you're not allowed to see it unless you're a certain age, or you have to consent to seeing some content because it could be distressing because it's about people in the war zone. You have accepted that you're going into whatever that content is because you're consciously, you want to go further and you want to see it, and you might back out because it's not for you. But what I'm getting at is ultimately it'd be great if the environment wouldn't penalize you and potentially delete your account for sharing that. It is frustrating, and I'm very aware of a number of models who've had their accounts deleted. And a lovely model called Clara, who's had her account deleted countless times. She is an artist in her own right. I mean, she's a model, and she takes incredible self-portraits. They're wonderful. They really are. And she's had a book published. And what's really frustrating is they are really beautiful images. And yet Instagram goes, well, I'm sorry, they're inappropriate. Is your account deleted again? And so it's terrible to feel that pressure where somebody is judging you and judging the art that you're trying to create using a framework of rules that in themselves do trip over each other. You can't show nipples. That's a bad thing unless it's a male nipple, which is fine. And then what if it's a male nipple and it's a picture of two gay men standing next to each other, and so the nipple is actually evocative for them but not for other people? So you can wander in this wonderful minefield of what's right and wrong, because that algorithm needs to prevent accidents or whatever they're trying to do, prevent people getting upset or getting offended. I mean, anyway, I'm never going to be able to shape or influence the algorithm, but I do find it amusing that you are having to repress your own work because of those sensitivities that otherwise, if you don't like that kind of thing, please don't look at my work. I'd much rather that was the way in which, we viewed art these days, but things have changed.
You said that you wrote to someone in Instagram. I've forgotten the job title, but did you get any response from them?
No, I mean, I'm friendly with the CMO at Meta. Friendly is a broad term. Somebody I know. He's a really nice guy. I was very annoyed at. This is me venting.
Vent away.
I had shared I'd shared on my story a picture by Mario Soretti. Mario Soretti, brilliant photographer, knows what he's doing. I have a fondness for photographers called Mario, clearly. And it was a picture he'd taken of a model. She was nude. I think she had big boots on, bare-chested, and she was holding this very large, I don't quite know what it was, big piece of fabric. It might have even been like an inflatable seat or something. It was quite abstract in the the composition. But he shared it, and it was on Instagram. It'd been there for a number of days. And anyway, no censoring. She was bare-chested. This is a man who has a massive, massive following by comparison to my tiny following. So there was clearly something going here. So he didn't have his image immediately deleted like would happen to other people. So I shared this image on my story and said, how is this allowed? How can he have his image deleted? And his image published, and other people would have a similar image deleted. My story was instantaneously deleted. I mean, 30, 40, 50 seconds after my story was shared. Somebody even managed to DM me and says, you sure you want to do this? Because that's about to get deleted. And he was absolutely right. And so there's clearly a kind of rule set in the algorithm, which if following equals X, gives them a window, flag it perhaps in their status, but don't necessarily delete it. But it was there for like a week. And then I was like, okay, I'm curious. What's going on here? How does this work? And this is also at the moment where Meta verified the concept of paying a certain amount of money. It's got a Netflix money each month to have a little blue tick next to your name. And I'd already kind of embraced that and decided to do that because I was thinking, well, maybe that's a way of protecting my account in that maybe you get preferential treatment because you're paying Meta this extra bit of cash. Turns out that's not the case because my story was deleted. Story about somebody else's photograph, not my photograph, to be clear. So it was like, I was mad. I was like, not mad, but I was like, this is mental. Why is censorship a standard? It says so. These are our standards. These are our policies. But it's not a standard because it's clearly standard-ish because it's applicable to most people, but not to special people. Special purely about monetizing a platform which needs to have lots of people wanting to see certain accounts. Anyways, whatever that is, I wrote to my friend and he pointed me at the head of product for Instagram. I just wrote a fairly lengthy thing with an attachment showing all of the scenarios. I, of course, didn't hear back from her because, I'm just a paying customer and I was paying like whatever it was, $11.99 for this Meta verified thing. I'm not a special treatment, special access, and I'm definitely not going to influence an algorithm which makes them billions a year. So, I vented nothing more. I vented and cancelled my Meta verified subscription because clearly it didn't give me the protection I wanted. The thing that I was also suggesting to this head of product there was that I would absolutely pay Meta, pay Instagram to be inside that walled garden that I spoke about. So I could share the images that I think I love and I enjoy without that fear of deletion. And so I was sort of trying to suggest, A, it's kind of weird that your algorithm does this, but B, I'm happy to pay as a customer. And so you've got this sort of other product opportunity within Meta to leverage probably quite a lot of paying customers for this particular thing. But anyway, I'm sure they just laughed at my email and hit the delete button.
Yeah, sadly, I'm inclined to agree with you. I mean, what is it in photography over other art forms specifically, do you think, that's particularly sensitive to censorship?
Yeah, so it goes back to interpretation and somebody's own views on it. We've had a lot of cultural shifts in the last 20, even 10 years, where what's right and wrong is much more clearly defined. The Me Too thing, a woke new societal shift. And so what was considered high fashion or fully acceptable image, a very evocative image, previously when I was growing up in the 90s, today is something that is definitely much more controversial. So you wouldn't have a Helmut Newton today taking images, nude images, and those being the sort of images that you'd want to see on the cover of Vogue. I mean, Vogue's never had full nudity, but they've definitely had images where the subject isn't clothed, they're just very elegantly positioned. But those sorts of things are much more sensitive. So if that's your benchmark, you've got these very high class magazines or publications, they have a much more conscious effort to producing material, knowing that the audience has changed and are much more sensitive to such things. So you, by nature, are catering to a slightly more neutral audience. And those sorts of images, certainly the ones that I've gravitated to when I was growing up, are definitely very much more subjective today. And people will have strong opinions. And that's the interesting thing about art, is it throws a curveball. It asks you to think differently. It asks you to work within parameters that you hadn't really considered. And if those parameters cause you to do something different and they cause you to create something that you hadn't intended to do, then maybe it's an opportunity to really be something that you weren't. I suppose the counter to that is, as I mentioned, it's in my DNA, and so I'm definitely pursuing a past in this career. I've had a big sort of gap in between sort of doing it professionally initially and then coming out the other side, having had kids. And so I'm in many ways regressing, and I'm absolutely trying to go back and achieve the sort of imagery that I was working in a profession where those rules weren't there. Those restrictions and the sort of attitude towards those sort of images weren't there. And so I'm probably an old dog, whatever the expression is. But, I'm not part of today's society when it comes to taking those images. I'm from another time, literally. And so I think, yes, one should appreciate what societal changes are and understand them and maybe even adopt them. But go back to podcasts, we all that help you sort of shape what you're up to. I was listening to one by a music producer called Rick Rubin, and he said something I thought was really incredibly impactful. He said, you should make art for yourself, not for others. And it's a really wonderful, literally, I want that on a t-shirt. It's a wonderful thing to remind yourself of. And I spend a lot of time and effort and invariably traveling and to maybe take some time off work to go and take these images. And I don't want to take images to appease a body of people or to appease an algorithm or to appease a set of rules. I'm taking them purely selfishly for myself. I want to take them because I enjoy the process. I enjoy working with people. I enjoy taking the images. And if that means that there's some nudity in there and that's not something other people want to see, then fine. Don't look at my images because I'm doing this for me. I'm making art for myself.
That's a really great outlook. And I think also, I was just wondering that when you were talking, you touched on potentially the value that we could see in censorship, in that it can make us creative within that constraint. So potentially, if the desire of the people or the desire of whatever is trying to censor us is to make us stop, fair enough, it will work with a lot of people, but potentially inadvertently, they may be encouraging people to become even more creative within the confines that they're put in, which, I sort of found quite fascinating to think about it like that, and also encouraging, because I know there's a lot of people that just give up because of the sick of having their work censored and taken down. But I've done this personally as well, like just to remind yourself that at the end of the day, you're making it for you. It's the process of creating. That's why I'm interested in doing it. It's not for the validation at the end of it of likes or comments, or that's positive. That's like a bonus. If it's negative, it's also a bonus, but at the end of the day, personally, I feel that similarly to you, like to focus on the creating of the work and trying to find ways to share it where it's maybe not so steeped in censorship and needing to change my work for it to be seen. I mean, what do you think the impacts on the wider public is of not being able to see, this art nude photography, for example, this sort of work in general, and also just the human body in those contexts in general?
Well, I think it's not the lack of images are changing society. I think it's, as we spoke about, society has changed on its own, and that has caused a trickle-down effect. You could call them repercussions. I really like F1. When I was watching F1 with my dad growing up, there used to be women who would stand in front of the car holding the number of the car up with a board, and that only recently has gone. I mean, recently, in the last 5, 6, 10, I don't know, well, definitely not. I don't even remember, because we were fine with, if you really think about it, what was the point of that person being there? It's on the pit lane anyway. I mean, you're there to see fast cars. You're not there to see a scantily clad woman. And the same is true like boxing, But those sorts of things have changed. So as a society, we've recognized that that's actually inappropriate and that's not acceptable. And I'm fine. I'm, a big believer. I think that's true. It's then underneath that, the associated societal shifts as toward what is acceptable. And there are definitely differing views. The younger generation are growing up in an environment where they are heavily influenced by, for that word, influence. So my kids, they're very aware of societal shifts and changes to things because of TikTok and others. And so they will have very strong opinions about a subject, which I think to myself, you can't really know the detail to the extent of, you form that opinion, but you can't really know the detail and the depth behind it in the way that somebody who has had 30 years, 40 years or older being immersed in that. So they very much exist, and they are, again, part of why these algorithms are keen to ensure everyone stays on a true path. I think if you are making art for yourself and those rules keep augmenting against these new views on what is acceptable, then don't invest the time in those platforms. I've switched. I've made myself a website, and I keep it updated with my new work and my new images, and they are not censored. They are the images that I like and I'm proud of, and I'm happy that my website is actually growing, and it's in terms of traffic, because people know that the images on there aren't held back. They aren't images that I'm trying to. I haven't deleted somebody's nipple because the nipple is offensive, which is mutilating somebody's body. Arguably, that's a whole other dangerous aspect of the algorithm that in itself is probably something to avoid. I don't even know if there's whole chunks of Instagram which produce that. But look, it's a long-winded way of saying use social media as appropriate. Enjoy the platform for what it's intended to do, and don't feel your work should be inhibited by its rules. And find a place to enjoy sharing your work with others who appreciate it for what it is.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to move away from censorship now. I just want to briefly touch on, you sent to me your recent hard light tutorial video podcast on YouTube. And when I started listening to that, at first I thought that you were American until something was suspicious. So I looked at the video description, and the podcast that I was listening to was actually an AI-generated conversation between two people based on an article that you wrote about hard light in photography and lighting in that way. Can you tell me a bit more about this? And also in the description, you said that you had a love-hate relationship with AI. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, let's describe what was going on here. So a little while back, I wrote a piece on my blog. It was a tutorial on hard light. I love hard light. And in this scenario, I was following a process that many, many years ago, you do castings in studios, lots of models would turn up, and you would sort of take a quick shot of them, and you just have one single light, bare head, and it would, in our case, was often against a white wall in not the studio, but in a kind of collective area where people have a coffee, and you'd sort of have a quick chat with them and explain the shoot, and then take a shot with them and move on. So this particular very hard light, very honest, you wanted to capture the model's shape and form, not necessarily personal characteristics, but you're literally just trying to, will they fit with this campaign that we're doing for hair or makeup or whatever it might be, right? So that's the context. That was when I learned about doing this, and it's actually a very fun way of shooting. Anyway, so I've enjoyed doing that in my home studio and other things, and I also like it's easy to, when you're going out to other studios, you can take a light with you, stick it in your backpack, and just have one light, and it's actually quite impactful the way in which you can use it. So I was getting lots of questions on Instagram like, how are you doing that? How do you do it? So I thought, well, I keep doing this in tiny inline comments or DMs. I keep sort of telling people. And I thought, well, why didn't I just make an article? I was also curious to see what the SEO, search engine optimization aspect of that was, because if you write something that is a keyword match for something that people are searching for, it can help boost your overall presence of your site. And it turns out that that's true. Lots of people are searching for how to do hard light images in studios. So put two together, and I made this little tutorial, which I included a few example shots and setups and things. And it's pretty basic stuff, but it's quite fun to do. Anyway, along came Google's Notebook LM, which is language model, a large language model. It's a tool it's a bit like ChatGPT, if we've had to go with that, but it's got some particular framework that it works toward. And the idea is that it's supposed to help you learn or digest information faster by summarizing the content. Now, ChatGPT can summarize it for you. If you imagine you're putting together a thesis, or you're putting together a talk, and you want to throw tons of information into this language model and then contextualize it by putting together a collection of topics or questions, it's great at formulating that for you. In addition, to that, it's got this extra capability where it can ingest something and then turn that into a podcast, much like you and I will chatting. It's going to sort of review the content, turn it into a conversation, and then actually personify it by adding two people discussing it as if they are real people going through it. And the nature of using a large language model is two things. One, it's created a structured conversation, much like somebody writing a script and two actors reading it out. But it's able to do that in a handful of minutes. And then it's got this wonderful way of adding voice to it. And it's not just a synthesized voice. It's not just a natural language processing voice or, the classic Alexa kind of voice where it's very robot-like. It's incredibly human. And that bit really struck me. So I thought, well, let's see what it thinks of my hard life tutorial and get them to discuss it. I won't go into it. It's got like tons of pitfalls as well. I uploaded it a few times to get an example that was half decent, but they made mistakes. There's a few things where they kind of focus on the wrong bit or they make an assumption. Those are known as hallucinations, where they thought they understood something and then extrapolated upon that context and then turned that into an answer that actually isn't true. That's quite normal with AI. Anyway, the output was something that I thought was actually rather good. I thought this is an example of something that is actually useful. I really enjoy podcasts. I think these sorts of things are great. And I go on my dog walks and I listen to podcasts and they educate me. I thought this is a wonderful way of learning new topics through the same medium, but ones that I had specifically chosen and specifically curated. So I could go and get some content that maybe would take me too long to read and just have two people talk me through it in this summary sense. So I thought, actually, this is actually an example of AI I like. But the love-hate bit is that so often you can scroll through Instagram and people are applauding a photo of a person, and maybe they're in the setting is, a beach or a New York or something like that. It's entirely fake, much like the people talking on my podcast. This was just an image that a keyboard warrior, has typed in a bunch of commands and said, I want to see a person in a tube, black and white. I want it to be vintage feel. I want to have evocative light. I want to see movement. But today's applications like Midjourney and similar can produce something really quite realistic. And that's cool in the context of the ability to achieve that. The thing that's not good is the idea that you're replacing hard work of trying to achieve that image yourself and the true creativity that comes with that. And there's a whole other suitcase of reasons why it's terrible. But on top of that, there's now a whole chunk of people who use these platforms like Instagram and see these images and have no idea that one's fake and one's not. I've seen and witnessed lots of forums on Instagram who promote photographers or models and publish their work and say, this is a great image by so-and-so. And then you've seen an image that's created purely in AI and they're being promoted on the same platforms. And all of their followers are going, oh, it's a great photograph. It's wonderful. And a select few of us, myself included, will pile into the comments going, this is not photography. You cannot reward this on your photography forum because it's been created in AI. You should understand that it is 100% AI and that's not a real person. They're not in New York and it was created by a keyboard and not a camera and not a lens and so that bit is the hate part of my reason for love-hate within AI. So I think this is one of those classic adages. I want AI to do the washing up so I can focus on being creative and not the other way around, right? And we've heard all that before, but I'm very much in that camp. And so I like some things and 9 times out of 10, I hate it when it wanders into the creative space.
How do you feel about, do you use Photoshop?
Absolutely.
How do you feel about the new tools in that, for example, where you can kind of like draw a circle around an object and ask it to remove, and then you're given like a variety of suggestions to choose from?
So Photoshop has added that somewhat recently, and there is a big difference. You're talking about generative fill, where you select an area and you type in a bunch of keywords, and you say, please replace the bird, but also add back in a cloud, so that it's more relevant to the image that I was trying to take. I think that example is probably fine, as in it's not really changing too much. In my case, I probably would have removed the bird previously using other tools that aren't AI. They're just, you're cloning a bit of sky and adding another copy of that bit of blue on top of where the bird was. And so you would have done that previously, and you wouldn't have wandered into the AI piece. Where I suppose this comes down to what percentage of how many pixels you've used to change the image using AI. So if you've taken a picture of a person and they're on a plain background, and then you've used AI to put them on the moon, then you're obviously changing that context entirely. But it's very real because you can't breathe in the atmosphere, and that moon is just obviously fake, and so you've set the scene. But if you change the image and they were on this stone wall, and you've changed the stone wall to look like a castle or something, and you said that this is in France, and I took this in a chateau, and you didn't, then I think as a photographer, you're wandering away from the true reason for being a photographer, your intent and what the reason for your editing and why you're doing it. That we've had for a long time composite photography, where you would take an image and consciously change the background. That's true of advertising as well. When we were taking images, I once had to photograph a panther, but you couldn't photograph a panther in your studio. You had to rent a big studio with licensing appropriate for wild animals, and the panther had to be inside this big cage. But the image had to then be edited to remove the cage and show the image of the panther next to the car, because that was the campaign we were doing, and that composite was something that was understood back in the 90s. And you would do that very differently today with Photoshop, obviously. But that was designed and planned, and it was a campaign. And it also looked very fake as well, because what's a panther doing next to a BMW? Those are, visually, we understand that. So it's when you fake something, consciously fake something, try and pretend it's real. That's when I think AI is changing how we behave. And I think it's the wrong use case for it when you're faking art.
It all comes down to intent, essentially. It's whether you're supporting the truth or you're supporting a lie with your use of it, fundamentally.
Yeah, exactly.
And I just want to turn away from technology. Overall, how would you sum up the effects that creating work as a photographer has on you and makes you feel?
Well, the first thing, it's an outlet. I always refer to myself as exercising the creative muscle. So how it makes me feel is incredibly happy, satisfied. It's a way of enjoying life to the full. It's a pursuit of mine that I realize now I've missed for many years, and I'm really relishing trying out new things and meeting new people. And so how does it make me feel? It makes me feel incredibly happy and lucky to be able to do this. That's how it makes me feel, to answer that question neatly.
Brilliant. That's great to hear. And also, you did say right at the beginning of our conversation, you referred to an appreciation of life with reference to shooting people. Do you think that's one of the reasons why you continue to want to pursue it?
Yeah, absolutely. I've traveled quite a lot. I'm really fortunate. I traveled quite a bit for work, and being able to travel, but also go with the camera and with a really creative person and take pictures together and really complete that by connecting with them so that the pictures you're taking have meaning. That is a vocation, that is, and I'm very incredibly fortunate to be able to do that in today's world and constraints. And I think, I'm a little bit older, and my kids are growing up, and they don't want their pictures taken of them anymore. So I'm forced to take pictures of them. It has to be other people. 20 years photographing my kids, and they're like, no more pictures. Don't want to hear about it. So I find myself with that need to take pictures, but having to work with other people. But I didn't realize how much fun I was having with people who genuinely wanted their picture taken and were good at it. And so putting that all together, it definitely excites me. And it's that line, what's your favorite picture? It's the next one I'm going to take.
Amazing. And I just want to end on a slightly light-hearted note. On Art vs. the Algorithm, we started a tradition with the final question. And I want you to pick a body part from a list, and each one corresponds to a question. Once I've asked you the question, I'll then ask you to fill in the gap with your own question so that I can ask future guests. As well, it can be fun or deadly serious. So I'm wondering if you'd like to select one of the following, either head, legs, boobs, bum, or hands.
Ooh, hands, please.
Okay. What was the sliding doors moment in your life? A moment where you could have taken a different decision that would lead you somewhere very different from here?
I thought I was always going to be a photographer. I thought that I was really going to make money out of it. And I was very clear of some other life goals. I want to get married, and I want to have kids, and I want to have a house. And it was becoming apparent that I was either going to be really famous, like some of the other people I'd worked with previously when I was assisting, or I was going to do something less exciting and do pack shop photography and something that really wouldn't ultimately excite me and maybe not even make a proper living. And so the sliding doors moment was when a photographer called David Preutz, who I used to assist, he'd bought Photoshop and at the time it came on a CD-ROM, but it also came on a bunch of floppy disks because your computer may or may not have a CD-ROM drive. So they were kind enough to send you both options. He had a CD-ROM and he said, I don't need these floppy disks. Would you like them? And I fed 7 individual floppy disks into my computer and installed Photoshop that way for the first time, probably breaking all kinds of licensing laws at the time in the process. But that taught me Photoshop. Well, the process taught me Photoshop. And it suddenly dawned on me that this digital age was coming and you could present your image that you'd taken differently. From a past where you had to print everything, I had a darkroom at home. My computer was several feet away from my darkroom, and I was suddenly being able to do things on my computer that I couldn't do in the darkroom. And that unlocked a whole other world of turning your image into a digital image. And then the internet came along, and so HTML, I learned HTML and CSS, and I learned how to convert my digital image into something you could see on the internet. And that sliding doors moment was something that taught me that actually the opportunity was to embrace technology that was coming and leverage it and learn software. And I actually set up a design agency off the back of that process. So it was also heartbreaking in some ways because I was having to say goodbye to photography as a day job, but it was exciting because I was pursuing something else that ultimately is my day job today.
Thank you so much for chatting to me on Art versus the Algorithm.
Yeah, it's been really good fun.
Art versus the algorithm. So, which side are you on? You've been listening to Art versus the Algorithm, hosted and produced by Will Preisner, music by Ned Wolfgang Kelly, voiceover by Alexia Kombu.